Hello, everyone. My name is Jean-Francois Hector. You can call me JF if you'd like. I work as the principal front-end engineer at a company called Couth. And in previous jobs, I was a UX designer, a user researcher, and before that, a design strategy consultant. So I work for a company called Couth. We provide effective and personalized digital mental health care. The people who use the platform are mostly 11 to 25-year-olds, but more and more we helping adults as well. It's a platform where people can get one-to-one counseling over chat messages, but also access lots of forums and articles written by other people like them in a way that's entirely safe. It's all pre-moderated. It's entirely anonymous, so it's a very safe space to discuss anything online. Today, I want to talk to you about how to make accessibility happen. And I'm sure that some of you watching this know about some of these things a lot better than I do. I'm going to tell you how I talk about accessibility to make it happen in my organization. But there are other ways to talk about accessibility that are just as good or even better in different situations. A lot of people use the word accessibility, but sometimes they actually mean different things. They think they agree, but they don't agree about what to do with accessibility. If I say to someone, hey, let's make sure that our new website is accessible, I might hear, oh, we can't do that just now. We have higher priorities. But don't worry, we'll add and fix accessibility later. This to me means that we really don't think of the same thing when we use the word accessibility. I want to start by clarifying what it is that I mean when I use the word accessibility in my organization. There are three parts to my presentation. First, I'm going to talk about what you need to commit to achieving as a team. Second, I'm going to talk about how you will be able to achieve it. And third, I'm going to talk about why achieving that is important. When I use the word accessibility, what people often think I'm saying is we need to build a website or an app so that every single person on the planet finds it easy to use. And then they sometimes think, whoa, that would probably require designing and building lots of additional features. And then they think, well, if we need to design and build lots of additional features, that probably take a lot more time. Oh, we should add those accessibility features later. And then they sometimes think, well, doing that would be remarkable. It would be quite extraordinary. It'd be a compassionate thing to do. It'd be a charitable thing to do. But ultimately, doing that is not our priority, and it might not even be our responsibility, is what they might think. That is not what I mean when I use the word accessibility with my teams. When I ask my team to make sure that our websites are accessible, I am actually not asking them to make sure that every single person on the planet finds it easy to use. I would really like that, but I find that I need to focus on asking them something that is more specific, less daunting, and more achievable as a first step. Here's what I'm asking them to do. I'm asking them to make sure that our websites support the accessibility features that are already included in operating systems and web browsers. I'm also asking them to be very careful not to do anything that would unnecessarily exclude people. And I'm asking them to meet a standard called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines Level AA at a minimum. Achieving those things is mostly not about doing additional work. It's mostly about improving our design process, improving our coding process, and improving our quality assurance practices. And for sure, learning to do that as a team takes time at the beginning. But then, once we've learned to do those things, it generally takes 5 to 10% extra time to follow these practices. So it's not very much. But that's assuming that we really are proactive about inclusion as we design and as we build websites and apps. If we are not proactive like that, if we're not careful as we go, and if we try and fix issues later, fixing those issues later is 40 to 100 times more time consuming and expensive to do. And doing that, doing what I'm asking my team to do, is not actually remarkable. It should be ordinary. It needs to have nothing to deal with compassion. It has nothing to do with being charitable. Instead, doing that is a key part of creating a quality service for millions of people. And it's also a legal and commercial requirement, especially with the new accessibility laws that have come into force very recently. And lastly, being careful not to exclude people is absolutely our responsibility as designers and developers and product managers. So that's it. That's everything I want to tell you today. What I'm going to do is to look at some of the things that I've just said in more details with some concrete examples. So let's start by looking in more detail at the what. What is it that we need to commit to achieving? Operating systems like Windows or macOS and web browsers like Google Chrome or Firefox already have all the accessibility features that we need. Our role is not to invent or design or build accessibility features, because those already come with the operating system or the web browser. Our role is to make sure that our websites and apps work with those features, that we don't get in the way of these features functioning well. So I'll give you an example. In HTML, if you write the word button in these angle brackets, just that bit of code creates a fully accessible button. You can use it with your mouse, you can use it with your keyboard, you can hear it with a screen reader, you can activate it with a screen reader, you can activate it just with your voice. However, if instead of using the keyword button, you use the keyword span, that will create something that can look like a button, but it will only work for some people. There's no good reason to not use the real HTML button element that has all these features built in. But that happens a lot on the internet. And this is an example to show you that most websites unnecessarily exclude people. These are just a few examples I could find within an hour on lots of different websites, some of them quite big. And this button versus span example is just one of the many ways in which we can exclude people without even knowing it. So in order to help us avoid all those mistakes that we could make, we use the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These really help us make sure we don't forget all the small things. Reading the accessibility guidelines is one of the most useful things that you could do. Some bits of the guidelines are a bit technical, but actually it's just HTML. The technical bits are just HTML and a little bit of CSS. Those, I mean, if you're interested in designing for the web, just learning just HTML and CSS to the level where you could read those guidelines and understand accessibility, that's actually very easy. It is very daunting, but it's actually very easy. Now, the problem with those guidelines, though, is that they are very daunting, they're very long, and they use a lot of jargon. I still recommend that you read them. However, I have also created a simplified summary of those guidelines. And now I'm going to play a video here that's just going to show you this document being scrolled up and down. If you have any vestibular disorder, like I have, you might want to look away. I'll tell you when it's done, because it'll have a vertical scrolling that you might not expect. So yeah, these simplified guidelines essentially say it in plain language. It's a simplification. It tells you which things require design input, which things don't require design input, and so on and so forth. I'm done with the video now. Here are some of the mistakes that the accessibility guidelines will help you avoid. Don't animate anything automatically for more than 5 seconds unless people can stop it. If you go on jet2.com, you'd see this animation continuously that flashes on and off next to the search form, which means I struggle to focus. Here's another mistake. Make sure text has enough contrast. The website on the right is a website of a designer who smashes expectations. And the website on the left is our own internal website, which clearly didn't have enough contrast before we fixed it. Do not indicate errors using colors alone. So on the left-hand side, it's a form, and I forgot to tick some boxes. And it tells me, please tick required boxes that are shown in red below. On the right, you see what the same screen looks like for someone who has protanopia. You can't really tell what boxes need to be ticked. Do not hide the keyboard focus outlines for keyboard users. By default, if we don't do anything, every button and every interactive element on the website will receive a focus outline as demonstrated on the left of the screen. And that signifies that this is the button or the link that's currently selected when keyboard users have pressed the tab key several times until they've reached that. In some circumstances, if we add custom styles to these focus outlines, they might also show when people click those buttons and links. If you don't like those outlines and click, you need to tell the developer, please, can you find out the right way to remove those outlines only for people who click on those things. It's really not difficult, but you need to ask. Next mistake, make sure that the visual structure of the page is represented in code. So you know how a design, a layout, or the level of, how big different bits of text are, that conveys the structure of the content. It conveys the structure of the page. But what if you can't see the page? People sometimes use screen readers. So we need to code the page so that the structure of the page is available to screen readers. You need to tell developers what the structure of the page should be. So I'll give you an example. On this website here, can you tell what the heading structure of the page should be? It's not showing the top of the page, it's just showing kind of the middle. Like this heading at the top, at the left here, experiences your customers will love. Should that be a heading level 1, a heading level 2, a heading level 3? What are the texts just next to it? Our approach is simple, accelerate ID to value by striking the ideal balance. Should that be a heading? What level? Should it maybe not be a heading and just be big text? Next mistake, make sure that important visual elements have enough contrast. The guidelines include contrast requirements that are about more than just text. We all know that text needs to have enough contrast, but what about other things? What contrast do they need to have? And those are just a few of the examples of the long list of mistakes that we could do. And if you just learn about all these mistakes, you'll be a way better designer and you'll have a lot of influence on people around you. I want to show you a few of the things that we have accomplished over the past few months at Kooth. I joined Kooth about 5 months ago now, nearly, and they hired me to help everyone else build websites and web apps that have a very good level of accessibility. I'll be honest, Kooth mostly is not meeting accessibility standards, but what we are doing is that every new thing that we design and build, every new thing that we have designed and built over the past 5 months definitely meets this standard. And we want to never build or design anything that doesn't meet the standard moving forward. So here's an example. Here's what it's like to sign into Kooth at 400% zoom. And parts of this uses the keyboard rather than the mouse. So you see when it's zoomed in, all the content reflows and it's still available and the modal window takes the whole screen like on mobile. You can do everything with the keyboard and you can just log in. Here's another example. Here's what it's like for one of our employees to send a message to a service user using just the keyboard, not the mouse, and using a screen reader. So for example, if they can't see the screen at all or can't see the screen well. Now, I must say, this is an example where this website, and there are lots of things on this website that are absolutely not accessible. And we have just rebuilt the little module on the right-hand side of this page that helps people send messages. That bit now is accessible. So here's what it's like to send a message using just a keyboard and without potentially seeing the screen.
New message button. Write your message below. Edit text. More. Cancel. Preview message button. Heading level 3 2 items. Confirm your message to Evangelos Deskov. Heading level 4. Your message. Thanks for your message. Please tell me more. Admin. Selected. Radio button. 1 of 2. Message type. Therapeutic. Selected. Back. Send message button. Your notification. Region. Your message has been sent. You are currently on a region.
Here's a third example. This is what it's like to visit part of a website where people can find activities that they might want to do. This is what it's like to browse that part of the website using just your voice, using iOS voice control.
Scroll down. Tap Go to Mini Activities. Scroll down. Scroll down. Tap View Activity, Share Advice with Others. Scroll down. Scroll down. Pan up. Tap I've tried this activity. Scroll down. Tap View Comments.
So all we've done here is to make sure that we do not get in the way of Apple's voice control feature. We did not build anything. We just made sure that we coded and designed everything in a way that is compatible with it. Here's another example of logging into the website using just the keyboard and a screen reader.
Page with vertical line home, web content. You are currently on domain. Inside web content. Link. Need urgent support. Visited. Link. In. Visited. Link. Log. Close login modal. Button. Closing menu. Username required. A password required. Login. Button. Your login details are incorrect. Have you used the right username? Login. Your new line. Joseph Gosrell. Tab test 2. Tab test 2. Your login web dialog with 10.
So now let's talk about how to achieve those things. This is not about designing and building additional features. Instead, it's about improving our design practices, improving coding practices, and improving our testing and quality assurance practices. At first, that does take a bit of time to learn. And you might be wondering, well, why do we need the time to learn that? Don't we know that already? I think it's fair to say that most people who design or build or product manage websites today haven't yet learned how to avoid introducing accessibility barriers. And there is no blame here. There are some reasons for that. The first reason is that the courses, the books, the tutorials that we use to learn our jobs, they rarely teach inclusive techniques. The second reason is that for most designers, most developers, most product managers, those accessibility barriers might not affect us personally. So we might not even realize that we are unnecessarily excluding people. I'll give you an example of this. So this is Nicola Steenhout, who has a very, very good podcast called Accessibility Rules. I highly recommend it. On Twitter, he's posted this image. He said, here's a picture of another hotel room that was advertised as accessible. but actually it fails to be accessible. Can you guess what some of the issues are with this shower room for someone who uses a wheelchair? I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about it. So here's what Nicola said. And the shower head is left all the way at the top of the rail. Reaching it is really, really hard and it could be quite dangerous. Second, the grab bars are not positioned where they would help you transfer from the shower to the bench. And thirdly, the bench is made of polished stone, so it's very, very slippery when it's wet. Now, my point here is that I consider myself an inclusive designer, but I had no idea, when I looked at this picture, I had no idea what those issues might be, because I'm not affected by those things. I can't know. Inclusive design is about designing with people who are going to be affected by those design decisions, not for them, because we don't know if we're not affected by that. That's really important. If you ask me why accessibility barriers happen, I would say that accessibility barriers happen when we, the people who are making design decisions, are not part or have no lived experience of the communities that will be affected by those decisions. And when we will not be affected by those decisions ourselves. That's when accessibility barriers happen. Unless we learn to be mindful of our own power and privileges. And I need to give credit to Alice de Somerville for having come up with this sentence at the top, or something very, very similar, that I basically stole from him. So I said it takes time to learn, but once we've learned it, following these inclusive practices only takes 5 to 10 extra time to follow them. So it only takes a little bit more time, but it only takes a little bit more time if we do this proactively as we design and as we build. However, if we don't do those things proactively, and if we only think about checking those things at the end and then trying to fix them, that will take 40 to 100 times more time to fix those issues later. Why is that? Well, for the huge majority of the cases, accessibility is not a separate feature. It cannot be successfully added at the end. So it doesn't work like icing on a cake. Instead, accessibility is a set of considerations that need baking in right from the start. So from that sense, it's a bit more like eggs in a cake. If you forget to add the eggs at the beginning of making the cake, you will really, really struggle to make the cake okay later. So to help us with this, we're building a design system. We call it Compass. And it's an inclusive design system. It's got lots and lots and lots of components that are designed to work together, being very, very consistent from a design perspective, but also each of them has got all these inclusive design and accessibility consideration baked into them. To your last part, let's talk about why it is important to achieve those things. In the UK, there are about 13 million people who have a permanent disability. And on top of this, there are about 5.5 million people who at any time have a temporary disability. And also, you might not be able to tell because 70% of disabilities are invisible. What's important to understand here is that when I talk about impairments, I'm not just talking about permanent impairments, like having an amputated arm, for example. Impairments can also be temporary, like having an arm injury, or impairments can also be situational, like, for example, if you're holding a baby in one arm, you can't use the arm to use your phone. Things like captions and videos are really important for people with permanent hearing impairments, but they also benefit everyone else in lots of other situations. So generally speaking, making something better for people with disabilities makes it better for everyone else. And drop curbs is another example of that. Accessibility is also a legal and commercial requirement. And lastly, meeting those accessibility standards is also our responsibility. There are two ways, or at least two ways, of thinking about disability. You could think that people are disabled by their impairments or differences, or you could think that people are disabled by barriers in society. If you think that people are disabled by their impairments and differences, then that's what's embedded in the very traditional definition of disability from the World Health Organization, that says that disability is the inability resulting from an impairment to perform an activity in a manner considered normal for a human being. That definition is so problematic. We'll see that they've changed it. In summary, it basically says that if someone struggles to use your website or your app, it's because of their impairment. So in that sense, in that way of thinking, inclusion means doing big, remarkable efforts and, being charitable or compassionate. Now, I think that this way of thinking is true to an extent, but mostly does not apply to our jobs. It's about doing the basics right to support accessibility features that already exist. So mostly, this is not how we should be seeing things, because the web is really, really not accessible, and we need to take more responsibility for it. So I like this other way of thinking. It's called the social model of disability. It says that actually people are disabled by barriers in society. And one quote from that way of thinking is this: disability is something imposed on top of our impairments by the way that we are unnecessarily excluded from full participation in society. Someone might have an impairment, but it does not mean that they are disabled. It depends whether the environment or the website or the app were built and designed with inclusion in mind. If you have not built your website app using accepted good practices, you are responsible for excluding people. And in that sense, inclusion means being careful not to put barriers in other people's way, and it means making proactive, reasonable adjustments. And this is what I'm talking to you about today. This way of thinking about disability is evolving, and I mentioned this old-fashioned definition of disability from the World Health Organization that basically says a disability is because you have an impairment or because you're not normal. They have changed that way of thinking, and now they say that a disability is actually a very complex phenomenon that's an interaction between a person's body and the features of society or the features of a website. So people with impairments are not automatically disabled. It also depends on the barriers in society. What I like to say in conclusion is that ability or disability, those things are in great part our responsibility as designers and developers. And there's lots that we all individually can do to make sure that we design and build things to a better standard. So thank you very much. Please reach out on Twitter, and I'll be around for the panel in a moment. Bye-bye.